How's it going, Eliminators? Today we're going to be taking a look at a snowblower that you might want to stay away from. So with that being said, let's get right into it. So in the shop today, we're going to be taking a look at this Briggs and Stratton branded snowblower. You've probably seen them before. This is a model 1227MD, which stands for 12 horsepower, 27-inch cut. The model number down here on the side is a 1696619-02. And obviously, because this is a Briggs and Stratton branded snowblower, it has a Briggs and Stratton 11.5 Snow Series engine. So that's going to be 11.5 foot-pounds of torque. And you would think that this is a decent snowblower just from the looks of it. It has a mostly metal construction with limited amounts of plastic up here on the console. The only thing that is plastic really is just the cover itself. So everything that is integral for the shifter linkage and the chute control there, that's all going to be metal. It's going to be reinforced, much more structural than the Husqvarna with the all plastic console that you guys saw in a previous video, which I can link in the top right of your screen, that broke the plastic tab that hooked up to the shifter linkage. So basically you lost all drive when that broke. And continuing along, we're going to be looking down here at the belts. So right away you're going to notice it has a dual impeller belt or a dual auger belt right there at the front. So you're going to get increased traction. Slipping will be limited because you have more surface area, because you now have two what looks to be like half-inch belts instead of one, let's say a 5/8 inch belt. And also we have a cogged flat drive belt there, which does have teeth on it. So this upper gear here has teeth, as well as the friction plate at the bottom. I'll zoom in there so you guys can see. And we're going to be coming back to talk about that belt in a moment. As for the chute control, we have this crank knob up here that is quite wobbly. Unfortunately, I cannot fix that, but that controls what looks to be like a 3/8 hex shaft to a U-joint, to a hollow metal tube, another U-joint, small hex shaft into a little gearbox there. So it is a little more robust. And looking at the front of this console, you guys can see that it even has a fairly big LED headlight. So it's going to give you lots of bright light for when you're using this equipment in low light conditions. That's going to light up the driveway fairly well. However, as you saw in the title of this video, why would I recommend that you might want to stay away from this seemingly pretty decent snowblower? Well, when this snowblower came into the shop, my customer wanted a full service, but it also needed some replacement parts, such as a new primer bulb, and it does need the drive idler pulley return spring, and it also needed some new shear bolts installed in the front auger. So I am a Briggs and Stratton dealer. I can get parts direct. So I started looking up these parts, and I was absolutely blown away by the price of these parts. All right, so over on the workbench here, I have a whole bunch of various parts in front of me. I did have the primer bulb in stock that I needed to replace. That was like a $12 part. However, I did not have the drive return spring or any of the shear pins needed. So what I did was I went to Google like usual, and I pulled up the model number. Once I found a parts listing, then I went to the diagram for both the drive and the front auger. We'll go over both of those. Starting off with the drive spring, you guys can see I have it highlighted there. That's going to be a part 707847. It's like a $9 part. No big deal for a spring like this that you're only going to be replacing once in a while. It's not something that's going to be like an item that you're going to have to replace, similar to what a shear pin would be, which is what we're going to be discussing now and what I was so surprised by. So there's going to be two different shear pins that this snowblower takes. There's going to be the impeller or second stage shear pin, and then there's going to be the first stage or the auger shear pin. So we'll start off with the auger shear pin. That's going to be a part number 707555, and you can see on my Briggs and Stratton parts portal there that those parts list for like $16 just for two shear pins, and they only come in two in a pack. So you could imagine that if you're going to be, replacing these, that parts are going to get quite costly, and it even gets more expensive from there, because if we look at the 707561 impeller or second stage shear pin, those list for like $20. And again, they only come in two in a pack. So you're going to be spending $10 a piece for each of these 2 impeller shear pins, and you're looking at spending $8 or $9 each for these first stage auger shear pins there. And it's not like I can just go and put any kind of bolt in it, because unfortunately that's usually what my customers do, which is why they end up coming to me for the repairs in the first place, so that the proper parts can be installed. Now, I just wanted to note that you may see some clips that seem out of place. For example, in one, the belt cover may be off, or the shear bolts might not be installed, and then I might jump to another clip where the belt cover and the shear bolts are both installed. It's just because I'm filming this over the course of a few days as I order parts, and also once the parts come in, but I'll try to make the video as easy as possible to follow along. Just keep that in mind. Now, this snowblower here is a 2-stage snowblower, and it only takes 1 shear bolt or shear pin per side, so that's going to be a total of 2. So one of those packs is going to be enough to get your snowblower up and running. But again, I always recommend the benefits of my customers buying a second pack so that they have the proper shear bolts. So in the event that they do shear one, they can replace it with the proper part. And that leads me to how this machine came into the shop. So I'm going to put a picture up on screen. You guys are going to see that my customer clearly broke some shear pins and replaced the shear pins with like roofing nails that were punched through a washer, and kind of just bent them around the auger shaft. I do not recommend that, guys. Whether you're going to be using nails like my customer did there, or replacing the shear pins or shear bolts with actual grade 5 bolts, not recommended. And I do have videos on why you don't want to do that. I can link in the top right of your screen. Whatever you use in place of shear bolts may not shear, and you could end up stripping out the gearbox gear or completely damaging the gearbox housing, at which point you're going to be looking at hundreds of dollars in parts and hours of labor, which results in a very expensive repair bill. So that's what my customer used. So again, going back to these shear pins that you're supposed to use, the super expensive ones, why couldn't my customer go down to a local hardware store or a big box store like Lowe's or Home Depot and buy some shear bolts? Now, as you guys have probably seen in previous videos, I do stock a variety of different shear pins for pretty much any machine. They're all kind of different. Some of them are going to be a shear pin like the MTDs take, while other Briggs and Strattons, let's say, might take something like a shear bolt. Now, normally you can Google that part number, and a lot of times Stens, you guys will see here, these are all Stens shear bolts there, will have a replacement, maybe Oregon, or maybe you'll be able to source them on Amazon or eBay, like you would be able to do with these very popular MTD shear pins there. The problem with these parts here is that you cannot get them anywhere except exclusively from a Briggs and Stratton dealer. Now, that gives you 2 separate issues. The first issue being that if Briggs and Stratton is the only place that sells these parts, well, if they go out of stock because they become backordered because everyone is buying them, well, then you now have a snowblower that will not work. And if you have to use it, you will be forced to use bolts or shear pins from a different machine. Now, even if I was to go and find a shear bolt that had similar dimensions of both the diameter and the overall length, I wouldn't be able to, in good faith, install those onto a customer's machine unless Briggs and Stratton said you could use it as a replacement part. You have to understand that I'm not a fly-by-night small engine mechanic. I'm doing this as a legitimate business, so I need to be installing the proper parts into my customer's equipment. Because if I were to install an improper shear bolt into my customer's machine, what could end up happening is if my customer hits something and I use a shear bolt that has a much stronger shear strength, if those shear bolts do not shear, well, then they could end up damaging their gearbox. And if it went into another Briggs and Stratton dealer and they found out that there were the wrong shear bolts installed, then that could come back to me and I may be liable. The second issue that I'd like to talk about is supply and demand. So, for example, these 707-561 impeller shear bolts, these are much thinner, these are much more expensive, and if you get a chunk of ice caught up in the second stage impeller there, they could end up shearing. You're looking at $20 again for 2, so $10 a shear bolt, but the reality is Briggs and Stratton is going to be able to sell these parts for basically whatever they want. Because you have to understand that as the supply of a product goes down and the demand for said product goes up, as will the price. So at $16 here in Canada, once you factor in a 13% HST, you're almost looking at like $19 or $20. Imagine every time you shear a pin, you're going to be spending a whole bunch of money on parts that are designed to fail. And if you think that's bad, we're not even done yet. Showing up on screen here is going to be the drive diagram that shows the auger or impeller belt. This one, as I showed you, has a dual auger belt, helps throw the snow far. However, if we go over to the part number, you guys are going to see the part number listed there, and the price is going to be over $62 here in Canada for that auger belt. And I thought there's absolutely no way they can sell one belt for $62. So I Googled that part number to see if they do sell both belts in a kit similar to the shear pins. And in fact, I could not find any information that both of those belts ship together, which means you would be spending over $120 just to replace your two impeller belts. Absolutely astronomical prices on this piece of equipment, guys. Now, once again, limited information on this machine. There are no actual dimensions of these belts supplied by Briggs and Stratton. So for somebody like me, if I got this machine in and both of these auger belts were completely smoked, I would have no choice other than to order the OEM belts from Briggs and Stratton, versus going out on something like a Toro or an Aaron's, pretty much any other snowblower, Cub Cadet, whatever it is, where they clearly list the dimensions of the belt. They would say that this is something like a 1/2 inch by, let's say, 38 inch raw edge or covered belt. And I would be able to type that into Stens or go to my local hardware store and buy a belt that would work to get a snowblower up and running in a pinch. Now that also brings us back to the drive belt, which I said we would talk about. This drive belt here is what's known as a Gates Power Grip HTD belt. And unlike the impeller belt up here, they do give you the number, and it is a 750-5M belt. Now, what they don't give you is one of the other numbers that you're going to need. There should be a third number after the 5M, and that's going to stand for the width of this belt in millimeters. So I've already measured this with a digital caliper, and this belt measures 13.5 millimeters thick. So you would be able to run something like a 750-5M-14 for a 14 millimeter belt, and you would be able to get a belt similar to this, but not a Gates branded belt, and save a little bit of money. If you wanted to buy that Gates Power Grip HTD belt through Briggs and Stratton, I put the parts listing up on screen there in my parts portal. It's going to be a part number 707585. And I think that belt lists for about $30, which isn't really all that crazy. Compare it to the auger belts, and it's about half the price of one of those belts. So as you can see, things start to add up quickly. We're going to be installing the proper shear bolts and also selling my customer another pack of shear bolts in case she runs into issues. Again, the whole reason they used nails instead of shear bolts was because they couldn't find them anywhere. However, I did find an Amazon listing, 26 something, so almost $27 for the one, and 38, almost $39 for the other. So you're looking at easily 67 or 68 bucks just to replace two sets of shear bolts there. So even though my customer's paying 17 and 20 through me, they are saving some money versus getting them elsewhere. So as you guys probably saw, I now have two brand new first stage auger shear bolts installed. Also, if you've watched my shear pin video, which I can link in the top right of the screen, when tightening up a shear bolt, you want to make sure that you leave it slightly loose. You're not tightening up a shear bolt like a normal bolt where you're trying to create a clamping force. What we don't want is this to be deformed and squeezing against the actual auger shaft from the gearbox, because the shear bolt may not actually shear if something gets jammed in there if it's too tight. So you want to make sure that those shear bolts have somewhat of a rotation to them. You're not trying to completely tighten them down super tight like an actual bolt. However, when you're replacing the impeller shear bolts at the back, you definitely want to tighten those up similar to how a bolt would be tightened. You do not want those ones loose. And then as you guys saw, I had like 4 packs of each of these shear bolts here. And what I normally like to do is if I'm installing a pack each, then I will also zip tie a pack of these to my customer's crossbar so that they have the proper shear bolts they can use as spares. Additionally, the extra ones are going to be for me so that I always have them in my inventory. So in the event that either or is on back order, I'll be able to get my customer back up and running again. Now, MTD that sells Cub Cadet, Troy-Bilt, Columbia, White Outdoors, snowblowers, even Yardworks and Yard Machines normally are going to have a couple holes on the plastic console here that you'll be able to install some extra shear pins. Additionally, a lot of Craftsman's, some Husqvarna's, and some other branded machines will have a little container built on top of the plastic belt cover. You'll have a lid you'll be able to open up and you'll be able to store your shear bolts there. However, this snowblower has neither of those options, so what I did was I just took a zip tie and zip tied 2 of the packs of shear pins for both the first and second stage. My customer will be able to hang on to those, keep them in the house or garage for safekeeping, and be able to use them whenever they need. If we look at the cost of this snowblower, I'll put a listing up on screen. I believe it was Lowe's.ca here in Canada. We're going to be looking at about $1,400 Canadian. However, this unit is currently on sale for $899. So you're looking at $900, which is really going to incentivize a lot of people financially to go out and buy this snowblower. And they have absolutely no idea of the costs of parts that they're going to have to spend to keep a snowblower like this properly maintained. Oh, and one last bonus piece here. I know that a lot of you may think that Briggs and Stratton is a quality engine builder. Unfortunately, guys, the reality is their engines aren't built like they used to be. I have 2 of these engines in the shop now with snapped connecting rods that were taken off of snowblower, and I pretty much am just salvaging them for parts. So in the event that somebody comes in with a cracked fuel tank or they damage the carburetor cover, I can take parts off of that. At least I have some used parts on a shelf that I can get them up and running again. And lastly, before I wrap up this video, if there are any Briggs and Stratton dealers located in the US that are watching this video, because I know that about 75% of my subscriber base is from the US, I'd love to know your list price and your cost, if you don't mind sharing it in the comments down below, for something like these shear bolts or those belts. Do you get one for $62 Canadian, or is it 2 in a pack like the shear pins here? I couldn't find any information from Briggs specifically on the belts, but like I said, $20 for 2 shear pins is absolutely crazy, and I know that price should be considerably less in the US due to just exchange rate, but I'm wondering how much less it is, because a lot of these parts are much more affordable in the US to begin with. So if you wouldn't mind sharing that, drop a comment down below. I'd love to hear from you. So like I said, $900 for a brand new snowblower doesn't seem all that bad, but if you have to spend $40 or $60 a year on shear pins, that's going to start to add up. Now compare that to, let's say, the MTD shear pins. You can buy those in a 50 pack, so whatever the part number is, you're going to put a -50, and you can buy these shear pins with a list price of $75 for 50. So if you divide $75 and I think 45 cents by 50, you get just over $1.50 each. Now those do not include the bow tie cotter pins. You're going to have to buy those separately, which I also buy in packs of 50. The number's kind of worn out there, but it just goes to show you that $1.50 per shear pin compared to $10 per shear pin for the Briggs and Stratton ones. That's a huge difference. And speaking of shear pins and cotter pins, I just got my 50 pack in of both. Again, I go through these things like crazy, guys. Customers are coming in, so I buy them in bulk and I pass the savings on to them. Well, that's going to wrap up today's video. You guys know that I always try to steer you in the right direction to save you a little bit of money. So if you're thinking about buying one of these Briggs and Stratton snowblowers, you may want to think twice, because in the long run, you may end up spending excessive amounts of money buying overpriced parts just to keep this unit maintained, and you may find that you end up spending more money than you initially saved versus going out and buying a name brand snowblower such as an Ariens or a Toro. But with that being said, if you guys enjoyed the video, think about leaving me a thumbs up. You know, it really helps me out. You can click here to subscribe and click over here to watch one of my previous videos. I upload every single week, so be sure to stop on by next week, check channel out for new content. And as always, guys, thanks for watching.